Have you ever wondered about the moments in history that seem to defy all logic? Those scattered, haunting events that slip through the cracks of official records, leaving behind more questions than answers, whispers of phenomena that challenge everything we think we know about time, space, and human capability. This is the shadowy realm where science brushes up against the supernatural, where brilliant minds reach for the impossible, and where some of the most extraordinary stories are born. Among these puzzling fragments of our past, few are as utterly compelling or as deeply unsettling as the Philadelphia experiment, an alleged military project cloaked in secrecy, wrapped in mystery, and tied to outcomes so bizarre they've captivated researchers and dreamers for generations. What if the roots of this 20th century enigma didn't begin in a naval laboratory, but centuries earlier, in candlelit chambers where medieval scholars and alchemists pursued their own visions of the impossible? There's a thread that runs through history, connecting ancient quests for transformation and hidden knowledge to modern experiments that push the boundaries of reality. Picture this, a world where the line between magic and science was thin, where adepts sought not just to turn lead into gold, but to unlock the very fabric of existence, to bend light, manipulate matter, and perhaps even step outside of time itself. These were the dreamers who worked in symbols and secrecy, guarding esoteric traditions that promised power beyond understanding. And it's here, in this rich tapestry of medieval mystery and ambition, that we may find startling clues to what really happened aboard the USS Eldridge in 1943. This journey isn't just about naval archives or government cover-ups, it's about the timeless human drive to reach beyond our limits, to explore the unthinkable, and to confront the consequences when we step into the unknown. Over the course of this video, we'll trace these echoes from the past, uncover the strange synchronicities between alchemical lore and cutting-edge experiments, and ask whether some secrets are simply too profound to stay buried. You're about to dive into one of history's most fascinating puzzles, so let's begin where all great mysteries start, not with an answer, but with a question that refuses to be ignored. In the early years of the Second World War, the United States Navy was desperately seeking any advantage to protect its fleet from enemy attacks, particularly from the devastating German U-boat wolf packs. This urgent need gave rise to a highly classified initiative, often referred to as Project Rainbow. The core objective was as audacious as it was revolutionary: to use emerging electromagnetic field theory to render a naval destroyer escort, the USS Eldridge, completely undetectable to radar. The idea wasn't to make the ship vanish from sight in the traditional sense, but to bend light and radio waves around it, creating a perfect cloak of electronic invisibility. The scientific minds reportedly consulted for such an endeavor were nothing short of legendary. Although his direct involvement is hotly debated and shrouded in the fog of rumor, the genius of Nikola Tesla is frequently woven into the story. Tesla's pioneering work with alternating current and his later experiments with energy transmission and force fields provided a theoretical foundation that some believe was crucial to the project's early stages. Similarly, the towering intellect of Albert Einstein is often cited. Given his unified field theory sought to intertwine the fundamental forces of the universe, namely electromagnetism and gravity. The military application of such a theory, the ability to manipulate these forces to alter the very perception of an object, would have been a tantalizing prospect for a nation at war. Yet, this 20th century ambition to achieve invisibility echoes a much older, more mystical human desire. If we rewind the clock to the medieval period, we find that the quest to vanish from sight was not a product of top-secret military labs, but a central pursuit in the cryptic world of alchemy and esoteric philosophy. Medieval scholars and adepts were not merely trying to turn base metals into gold. They were on a profound spiritual and scientific journey to understand and master the hidden principles of nature. Invisibility was considered one of the supreme achievements, a hallmark of a true master who had learned to manipulate the unseen fabric of reality. Ancient texts like the Greek magical papyri and countless grimoires from the Middle Ages are filled with complex rituals, elaborate sigils, and recipes for concoctions said to grant the power of disappearance. These weren't just simple tricks, they were intricate procedures that blended astrology, herbal lore, and the invocation of spiritual forces. The philosopher's stone itself, the ultimate goal of the alchemist, was believed to confer not just immortality and transmutation, but also the ability to become unseen. This pursuit was deeply dangerous, often conducted in secret for fear of persecution, and it was built on a worldview where the material and spiritual realms were intimately connected, where a change in one's spiritual essence could manifest as a change in physical presence. The parallel is haunting. Centuries apart, both the medieval alchemist in his secluded chamber and the modern physicist in a naval laboratory were attempting to achieve the same seemingly miraculous feat. One used incantations and arcane symbols, believing the key lay in harmonizing with celestial forces and purifying the soul. The other used complex equations and massive generators, believing the key lay in manipulating electromagnetic energy and space-time itself. Both were operating on the very cutting edge of what was considered possible, pushing against the boundaries of known science, and both understood that such power came with immense risk and profound responsibility. This historical echo suggests that the story of the Philadelphia experiment is not an isolated anomaly, but the latest chapter in humanity's ancient and enduring struggle to grasp the deepest mysteries of existence. According to the official records of the United States Navy, the story of the Philadelphia experiment is a complete fabrication, a work of science fiction that somehow became entangled with real historical events. They maintain that Project Rainbow, at least in the form described in these wild accounts, never existed. The Navy acknowledges research into degaussing a process where a ship's hull is demagnetized to make it less detectable to magnetic mines and torpedoes, but they firmly deny any experiments involving invisibility, teleportation, or tampering with the fabric of spacetime. From this official perspective, the entire tale is dismissed as a hoax, a misunderstanding of mundane military technology that was then amplified by rumor and an active imagination for the paranormal. But then we have the witnesses, the sailors who came forward with stories so bizarre and so consistent in their terrifying details that they simply cannot be easily dismissed. These men described a day in October of 1943 when the powerful electromagnetic generators aboard the USS Eldridge were activated. Instead of simply hiding the ship from radar, they claimed the vessel was enveloped in a strange greenish fog before vanishing from sight entirely, not just from radar screens but from the Philadelphia Naval Yard itself. The stories say the Eldridge momentarily reappeared over 200 miles away in the Norfolk Naval Yard in Virginia, only to then blink back to its original position. This wasn't invisibility, this was teleportation, and the cost was unimaginable. The alleged aftermath for the crew was a descent into a living nightmare. Some sailors were said to have been found fused with the very metal of the ship itself, their bodies horrifically merged with the deck plates and bulkheads in a silent scream of agony. Others reportedly suffered from severe mental disorientation, experiencing bouts of uncontrollable invisibility where they would fade in and out of existence long after the experiment had concluded. Many were said to be plagued by intense nausea, crippling headaches, and profound psychological trauma, with some ultimately succumbing to madness or vanishing completely without a trace. The official explanation for these men, that they suffered from combat fatigue or simple accidents at sea, felt hollow and insufficient to those who believed they had seen the truth. This narrative of a cursed voyage and a crew punished for tampering with forces beyond their understanding finds a powerful and eerie mirror in the folklore and literature of the medieval world. Think of the legend of the Flying Dutchman, a ghost ship doomed to sail the oceans forever, its crew trapped in a state between life and death as punishment for their captain's hubris. Or consider the ancient Celtic tales of entire islands that would vanish into the mist, their inhabitants lost to time after meddling with fairy magic they could not control. These are not just simple ghost stories, they are profound cautionary tales about the consequences of reaching for knowledge or power that belongs to the gods. In both the modern conspiracy and the medieval myth, we see the same terrifying pattern, a breach of the natural order followed by a terrible reckoning. The alchemist who successfully creates an invisibility cloak through forbidden rites might find himself unable to return to the mortal world, forever trapped between realms. The naval crew aboard the Eldridge, in this version of events, became the modern embodiment of that ancient warning. They were not just victims of a scientific accident, they were the latest casualties in humanity's age-old struggle with the forbidden fruit of ultimate knowledge. Their suffering, as described by the conspiracy, echoes the fate of those who, throughout history, were said to have gazed upon what man was not meant to see. This parallel suggests that whether through ritual or reactor, the outcome of trespassing beyond the veil of perceived reality remains disturbingly, tragically the same. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of the entire Philadelphia experiment lore comes from the fragmented and haunting testimonies of the men who claim to have been there. One of the most frequently cited witnesses was Carl Meredith Allen, who went by the name Carlos Allende, in a series of frantic, almost incoherent letters to astronomer and author Morris K. Jessup, Allende described himself as a crew member on a nearby ship, the SS Andrew Furuseth, who watched in horror as the Eldridge vanished into a greenish haze. He detailed the devastating aftermath, speaking of sailors who went utterly insane, men who burst into flames in front of their shipmates, and others who simply vanished and were never seen again. While Allende's credibility was often questioned, his passionate, disturbing accounts were the initial spark that lit the fuse of this modern legend. But other, less publicized accounts emerged over the years, adding layers of grim detail. Some former sailors spoke of a deep, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through their very bones just before the world dissolved around them. They described an overwhelming sensation of falling, not through space but through something else entirely, a void of howling silence and impossible colors. The reported physical effects were horrifying. Men claimed to have felt a searing coldness, as if every molecule in their body was being pulled apart. The nausea was not mere seasickness, it was a profound, existential vertigo, a feeling of being utterly unmoored from reality itself. The most terrifying claim, however, was that some crew members did not fully return. They were said to phase, flickering in and out of visible existence for days or even weeks afterward, trapped in a state of unstable tangibility, unable to fully anchor themselves in our world. This phenomenon of phasing or becoming unstuck in time bears a stunning and unsettling resemblance to far older stories of supernatural displacement. Throughout medieval Europe, countless folktales and religious texts document accounts of individuals who were believed to have been abducted by fairies or demons. A farmer might vanish from a familiar path, only to reappear days, years, or even decades later, disoriented and claiming no time had passed at all. These unfortunate souls were often described as being away with the fairies, their bodies present but their spirits or consciousness trapped in the mystical otherworld, a realm that existed just out of phase with our own. The medieval explanation was spiritual or demonic, but the symptoms are eerily similar: severe disorientation, a lost sense of time, and a fragile, fractured connection to the physical world. In a more sinister parallel, many of these medieval abductees were also thought to be victims of demonic possession. The Catholic Church documented cases where individuals would exhibit drastic personality changes, experience violent fits, and display a knowledge of things they could not possibly know, symptoms not entirely unlike the mental trauma described by the sailors of the Eldridge. Where a medieval priest might diagnose an unclean spirit wrestling for control of a man's soul, a modern observer might see the psychological aftermath of an extreme traumatic event, a mind shattered by an experience it cannot process. In both narratives, the human being becomes a battleground for forces beyond their comprehension, and the resulting damage manifests in shockingly comparable ways. Whether through the lens of electromagnetic science or medieval superstition, these accounts point to a universal human fear, the terror of losing control over one's own body and mind, of being rendered invisible and powerless in the world. The sailor phasing through a solid steel bulkhead and the peasant claimed by the ferry folk both represent a fundamental violation of natural law. They become living ghosts, visible reminders of what happens when the barriers between worlds grow thin, whether those barriers are breached by a forbidden ritual or a runaway scientific experiment. These harrowing personal stories, separated by centuries, suggest that the human experience of crossing into the unknown may carry a price that is timeless and universally understood in our deepest fears. To understand the science rumored to be behind the Philadelphia experiment, we need to look at the fundamental principles of electromagnetic fields. Imagine the universe as a vast, invisible ocean of energy, with waves and currents flowing around us at every moment. An electromagnetic field is essentially a force field generated by moving electrical charges, and it's this invisible energy that governs everything from the behavior of a simple magnet to the transmission of radio signals across the globe. The theoretical leap proposed by Project Rainbow was to use incredibly powerful, precisely tuned electromagnetic generators to create a massive field around the USS Eldridge. The goal wasn't to make the ship disappear to the human eye, but to bend the very light and radar waves around its hull, creating a perfect pocket of invisibility by manipulating the fabric of spacetime itself. This idea of warping perception by controlling energy finds a direct, if more mystical, parallel in the work of medieval alchemists, who believed that by manipulating the unseen forces of the cosmos, they could achieve a similar feat of vanishing. While the Navy's official research was almost certainly more grounded, the legend often points to the genius of Nikola Tesla as a potential key to unlocking this technology. Tesla's later work delved deeply into the transmission of energy without wires and the potential to create powerful force fields. His famous experiments with the Tesla coil demonstrated an ability to generate incredibly high-voltage, high-frequency alternating currents, producing massive electrical arcs that seem to defy conventional physics. Some researchers speculate that his untimely death in early 1943 and the immediate seizure of his research notes by the government might be more than a coincidence. Could his theoretical blueprints for transmitting immense energy through the air, or even through the Earth itself, have provided a foundation for an experiment in electronic camouflage? The concept aligns with Tesla's lifelong dream of harnessing natural forces for the benefit of humanity, though this application would have been a terrifying perversion of his vision, turning a tool for peace into a weapon of war. This ambition to command invisible forces for transformation binds the 20th century physicist to the medieval alchemist in a profound way. Where Tesla and his contemporaries used mathematics and engineered coils to generate and focus electromagnetic energy, the alchemists used ritual, symbol, and a deep belief in celestial correspondences. An alchemist seeking invisibility wouldn't have built a generator. Instead, he might have crafted a special ring or amulet from a specific metal, like mercury or electrum, during a particular astrological alignment. He believed that these materials and moments could capture and focus the ethereal energies of the planets, creating a localized field that would bend light around the wearer. Their laboratories were filled with intricate diagrams, not of electrical circuits, but of sacred geometry, which they saw as the divine architecture of the universe, a blueprint for harnessing its hidden power. Both the modern scientist and the ancient adept were, in their own ways, attempting to achieve transmutation. For the alchemist, the ultimate goal was the transmutation of base lead into spiritual gold, a process that represented the purification and elevation of the soul itself. Invisibility was simply one potential manifestation of this mastery over the material world, a sign that the philosopher had learned to manipulate the prima materia, the fundamental substance of creation. For the physicist working on the Eldridge, the goal was a different kind of transmutation, changing the perceived physical properties of a massive object, making a solid warship undetectable. Both pursuits were rooted in a desire to overcome the limitations of nature, to rewrite the rules of reality through a deep understanding of its most fundamental forces. Whether through the hum of a Tesla coil or the chant of an incantation, the objective remained eerily similar: to wield control over the unseen fabric that holds our world together. If the story of the Philadelphia experiment ended with the alleged horrors aboard the USS Eldridge, it would be a terrifying enough chapter in the annals of conspiracy lore. But for many researchers, that event was not an ending, it was merely the beginning. The tale dramatically expands with the introduction of the Montauk Project, a purported secret military program said to have taken place at Camp Hero, a decommissioned Air Force base on Long Island, New York, throughout the 1970s and 80s. According to these theories, the work begun in Philadelphia was not abandoned. It was refined, continued, and pushed into even more astonishing and disturbing territory. The goal shifted from mere invisibility to the outright manipulation of time itself. The alleged connection between the two projects often centers on a single, mysterious figure, John von Neumann, a brilliant mathematician and physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project. Some accounts claim that after witnessing the catastrophic human cost of the Philadelphia experiment, von Neumann was tasked with going back to the drawing board to fix the profound flaws in the technology. The Montauk Project, then, is framed as his second attempt. The stories say that researchers there had access to a massive psychotronic device, a kind of supercomputer that could amplify human consciousness and use it to literally bend time and reality. They weren't just trying to hide a ship anymore. They were allegedly attempting to open stable portals to other times and dimensions, conduct psychological warfare, and even create physical objects from pure thought. This breathtaking leap from manipulating matter to commanding time itself finds a powerful and prophetic echo in the ambitions of medieval mystics and esoteric scholars. While they lacked supercomputers, many were obsessed with the concept of mastering time. They sought to divine the future through astrology, scrying, and complex systems of prophecy, believing that time was not a rigid line but a fluid tapestry that could be read and perhaps influenced. The legendary prophecies of Merlin, for instance, describe a figure who could see across centuries, perceiving the threads of destiny as if they were happening in the present moment. This wasn't passive prediction, it was an active engagement with the flow of time itself. Furthermore, the pursuit of the philosopher's stone was always about more than gold. It was believed to grant immortality, the ultimate victory over time's relentless march. An alchemist who achieved this goal would theoretically step outside of time's flow, becoming an eternal witness to history. In a similar vein, certain Kabbalistic practices aim to achieve kefetzat haderech, the shortening of the path, a miraculous ability to traverse vast distances in an impossibly short time, which is itself a form of manipulating space-time. These medieval seekers would have understood the goals of the Montauk Project perfectly. They shared the same driving desire to move from being a subject of time to becoming its master. The most chilling aspect of the Montauk legends involves experiments with human subjects, particularly young boys with strong psychic abilities who were allegedly used as mental focal points for the time-bending machinery. Their consciousness was said to be the key that could lock onto a specific date in the past or future. This, too, resonates with darker elements of medieval esotericism. The concept of using an innocent or a purified human soul as a conduit for supernatural power appears in various grimoires and folk magic traditions. A scryer, often a young boy or a virgin, would be used to peer into a crystal or a shoe stone to receive visions, their pure consciousness acting as a clear window into other realms or times. The Montauk narrative takes this ancient and ethically fraught concept and projects it onto a terrifying technological scale. Whether these two projects are truly connected by a hidden thread of government research or simply by the enduring human fascination with controlling our reality, the parallel is compelling. Both narratives speak to a deep, almost primal urge to break free from our most fundamental constraints, the visibility of our bodies and the linear progression of our lives. The medieval mystic gazing into a reflective pool and the modern technician monitoring a psychotronic radar screen are, in a sense, engaged in the same quest. They are using the tools of their era to answer the same timeless questions about the nature of existence and our potential place within it, demonstrating that our hunger to understand and command the universe's greatest mysteries is a story without a true beginning or an end. Among the most mind-bending claims to emerge from the Philadelphia experiment lore are the accounts of temporal displacement, stories asserting that the powerful energies unleashed that day did more than move the ship through space. They sent individual sailors hurtling through time itself. These reports describe crew members suddenly finding themselves in unfamiliar surroundings, witnessing scenes from different centuries, or even interacting with people from the distant past or far future before just as suddenly snapping back to the deck of the Eldridge, disoriented and terrified. One often repeated anecdote tells of sailors who momentarily found themselves in a tavern, only to be met with shock and fear by its patrons before vanishing from their sight. Another speaks of a crewman who allegedly fell through time, arriving in the 1980s and needing to be debriefed and integrated into a new life, his original existence completely erased. This concept of an individual being unexpectedly unmoored from their own timeline and deposited into another is not a modern invention. In fact, it is a cornerstone of folklore across numerous cultures, particularly throughout medieval Europe. These tales were often called time slips, and they were frequently associated with specific liminal places, ancient forests, misty moors, or old crossroads believed to be thin places where the veil between eras was fragile. A common story might involve a traveler who steps off a well-known path only to find the landscape has changed, encountering knights in armor where farmers should be, or witnessing a bustling village that had been ruins for centuries. These experiences were not explained with science, but with magic, fairy enchantment, or divine intervention, serving as moral lessons about the dangers of straying from the path, both literally and spiritually. The emotional and psychological impact described in both the modern and medieval accounts is strikingly similar. A sailor from the Eldridge who experienced a time slip would likely return gripped by a profound sense of dislocation and vertigo, his understanding of a stable, linear universe shattered. He would carry the impossible memory of a world that, for him, was undeniably real but for everyone else was pure fantasy or history. This mirrors the plight of the medieval time slip victim perfectly. Imagine a peasant who stumbles into a fairy revel and watches a night of dancing, only to return to his village and find that 100 years have passed and everyone he knew is long dead. He would be a ghost in his own life, utterly alone in his truth. This shared trauma highlights a universal human fear, not just of moving through time, but of becoming lost within it, of having your entire reality become an unshareable story that marks you as an outsider. These narratives also explore the terrifying flip side of the coin, the perspective of those who witnessed the time traveler. In the Philadelphia stories, the sailors reportedly caused panic when they appeared in the wrong era, their strange uniforms and bewildered behavior marking them as dangerous outsiders or perhaps even demons. This, too, is a classic element of medieval legend. Encounters with beings from another time were almost never peaceful. They were seen as ominous portents. A figure from the future with unfamiliar clothing and technology would be interpreted as a phantom, a ghost come to deliver a warning, or a demonic trickster sent to lead people astray. Their appearance was a rupture in the natural order, a sign that something was terribly wrong. The reaction was rarely curiosity. It was usually fear, hostility, and a desperate attempt to purify or protect the community from this unnatural intrusion. Whether through the lens of a rogue electromagnetic experiment or a fairy's enchantment, these stories speak to a deep, underlying anxiety about the stability of the world we live in. They question the very nature of our reality, suggesting that the flow of time may not be the rigid, one-way river we believe it to be, but something far more fluid and unpredictable. The medieval mind used the language of magic and religion to express this fear, creating tales that warned of the dangers of meddling with forces beyond human understanding. The modern mind, armed with science, channels that same primal fear into stories of technological hubris and government secrets. Both versions serve the same purpose. They are cautionary tales, reminding us that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed, and that the cost of unlocking the secrets of time may be the very fabric of our sanity and our place in the world. The most immediate and visceral accounts from that day speak of a searing, inhuman pain. Sailors described a sensation unlike any burn they had ever felt, a deep cellular agony as if their very flesh was being rearranged by an unseen force. Reports emerged of men with strange, radiation-like burns covering their bodies, lesions that appeared not from fire or acid, but from an energy that seemed to cook them from the inside out. These weren't merely injuries, they were marks of a profound violation of the body's natural state, a physical manifestation of having been subjected to forces that human biology was never meant to endure. The medical staff who allegedly treated these men were said to be baffled, unable to classify the wounds with any known diagnosis, adding a layer of clinical horror to the sailors' suffering. But the physical trauma descended into the realm of pure nightmare with the most infamous claim of all, that some crew members were found fused with the metal of the ship itself. Imagine the terror of discovering a shipmate whose arm has become one with a bulkhead, the skin and steel merging in a grotesque, seamless weld. Other stories tell of men who were simply embedded in the deck, their bodies appearing to have phased partway through the solid structure before the field destabilized, leaving them trapped in a state of living statuary. These accounts paint a picture of a technology that failed catastrophically, losing its precise control over molecular structure and blurring the boundaries between organic and inorganic matter in the most horrifying way possible. The ship itself became a tomb for these men, a permanent, screaming monument to the experiment's horrific cost. The mental and psychological aftermath was, if anything, even more devastating. Survivors were described as being utterly broken, their minds shattered by an experience that defied all rational understanding. They suffered from extreme disorientation, unable to distinguish past from present or reality from nightmare. Many were plagued by intense paranoia, a deep-seated fear that they might suddenly vanish again or that the world around them was not solid. Others reportedly experienced violent mood swings, from catatonic withdrawal to explosive, unprovoked rage. The military's alleged solution, subjecting the most severely affected to aggressive electroshock therapy and memory erasure techniques, only added another layer of trauma, essentially attempting to bury the evidence of a catastrophe by further damaging the minds of its victims. This narrative of a crew subjected to bizarre physical transmutations and soul-crushing psychological torment finds a powerful and eerie mirror in medieval descriptions of divine or demonic punishment. Throughout religious texts and folklore from that era, those who dared to blaspheme or traffic with dark forces were often said to be struck down by heaven with afflictions that served as a grim warning to others. Think of a sinner being turned to stone for their transgressions, their body frozen for eternity as a testament to their hubris, a fate not unlike that of a sailor fused with his ship. Or consider the stories of individuals who, after making a pact with a demon, would be afflicted with festering, incurable boils or a burning sensation that no water could quench, physical torments that mirrored the mysterious burns reported by the Eldridge crew. The psychological component is just as striking. Medieval accounts of demonic possession detail symptoms that are hauntingly similar to the sailors' reported mental states. A person who had been touched by the supernatural was often described as losing their grip on reality, speaking in tongues, experiencing fugue states where they would vanish for days, and displaying a profound terror of sacred objects. Their personality was said to be overwritten by a foreign, malevolent intelligence, leaving them a hollowed-out shell of their former self. Where a medieval priest would see the work of a devil wresting control of a man's soul, a modern observer might diagnose severe dissociative identity disorder triggered by extreme trauma. In both frameworks, the human mind is portrayed as a fragile thing, easily shattered by an encounter with a power far beyond its capacity to process. These parallels suggest that whether the cause is framed as a runaway scientific experiment or a supernatural curse, the human experience of crossing a forbidden boundary results in a remarkably consistent set of consequences. The body is marked and transformed against its will, and the mind is broken by the revelation that the universe is far stranger and more terrifying than it had ever believed. The afflicted become living cautionary tales, their very existence a warning against the pride of seeking knowledge or power that belongs to the gods. The story of the Eldridge's crew, whether fact or folklore, taps into this ancient archetypal fear, reminding us that some doors once opened cannot be closed, and the price for looking behind them is paid in flesh and sanity. Perhaps the most compelling argument for those who believe the Philadelphia experiment was real lies not in the wild stories themselves, but in the frustrating, almost impenetrable wall of official secrecy that surrounds it. The United States government's stance has been one of blanket denial, but a closer look reveals a pattern of missing information, bizarre coincidences, and alleged intimidation that feels all too familiar to students of historical cover-ups. The primary military records that could definitively prove or disprove the events of October 1943 are, according to official sources, lost. Key documents from the naval shipyard in Philadelphia from that specific period are inexplicably missing, with authorities stating they were likely destroyed as part of routine bureaucratic procedure. For skeptics, this is a convenient, if unverifiable, explanation. For believers, it is the first and most obvious clue of a systematic effort to erase a catastrophic mistake from history. The experience of those who tried to investigate the story only adds fuel to this fire. Morris K. Jessup, the astronomer whose book on UFOs prompted Carlos Allen's initial letters, found himself at the center of this mystery. After engaging with Allen and beginning to dig deeper, Jessup's life took a dark turn. He received an annotated copy of his own book in the mail, filled with notes written in 3 different colors of ink, purportedly from 3 different individuals with an incredible depth of knowledge about anti-gravity and advanced physics. This so-called Varro edition of his work was later published by a small defense contractor, further blurring the lines between fringe theory and official interest. Not long after, Jessup's career and personal life began to unravel under strange circumstances. He was found dead in his car in 1959, in what was ruled a suicide by carbon monoxide poisoning. To many, the timing was deeply suspicious, suggesting his inquiries had led him into dangerous territory he was never meant to explore. Other researchers and alleged witnesses over the decades have told similar stories of quiet pressure. Some former sailors who spoke out reported being visited by men in suits who strongly suggested they retract their statements and cease all discussion of the event. Others described having their military service records altered or experiencing strange difficulties in their post-service careers, as if an invisible hand was working to discredit them or silence their accounts. This pattern of witness intimidation and the suppression of inconvenient testimony is not a modern invention. It is a timeless tactic of power, and to find its historical parallel, we need to journey back to the medieval world, where the control of dangerous knowledge was not a matter of national security, but of spiritual and political survival. In the Middle Ages, the Catholic Church wielded immense power, and a central pillar of that power was its role as the sole arbiter of truth. Knowledge that challenged church doctrine was not merely incorrect, it was heretical, a direct threat to the divine order and the stability of the realm. Those who pursued alchemy, astrology, or other forms of esoteric study walked a razor's edge. Their work could be tolerated if it was framed as a pious search for a deeper understanding of God's creation. But if it veered into independent spiritual revelation or promised power that bypassed the Church's authority, it was ruthlessly suppressed. The records of the Spanish Inquisition are filled with cases of scholars and mystics who were interrogated, their libraries seized, and their manuscripts burned to ashes in public squares. This was not just about punishing individuals, it was about eradicating the very ideas they represented, ensuring that certain lines of inquiry were permanently closed off from public discourse. Secular rulers were just as complicit in this knowledge suppression. A king or nobleman might secretly patronize an alchemist, hoping to fill his coffers with manufactured gold. But if the experiments failed, or worse, if they succeeded and the knowledge threatened to become public, that same alchemist could easily find himself imprisoned or executed to protect the secret. The ruler's economic and political power depended on a controlled narrative. The existence of a simple method to create limitless wealth would instantly collapse the economy and undermine the very foundation of his rule. Similarly, knowledge of a potent new weapon or a method of invisibility would be the most closely guarded secret of the state, its very existence denied to friend and foe alike. Those who stumbled upon it by accident would be silenced, not through bureaucratic record shredding, but through more permanent medieval means. The parallel is stark. Whether it's a 20th century naval officer ensuring a failed experiment never tarnishes the military's reputation, or a medieval king protecting the secret of a potential advantage from his rivals, the motive is identical: the preservation of power and the control of a narrative. The methods may have evolved from the dungeon and the pyre to the classified file and the non-disclosure agreement, but the underlying principle remains. Forbidden knowledge, whether deemed heretical or a threat to national security, has always been managed by those in charge. The empty file folders in a naval archive and the burned manuscripts of a medieval heretic serve the same purpose. They create a void where a story should be, a silence that becomes, in itself, the most compelling evidence that there was indeed something there worth hiding. At the heart of the scientific speculation surrounding the Philadelphia experiment lies one of the most tantalizing what-ifs in modern physics: the potential application of Albert Einstein's unfinished unified field theory. Following his world-changing theories of relativity, Einstein dedicated the later part of his career to a single, monumental goal: finding a single, elegant mathematical framework that could describe both gravity and electromagnetism as manifestations of one underlying universal force. This was not just an academic exercise, it was a search for what many have called the theory of everything, a set of equations that would unlock the deepest secrets of the cosmos. The legend suggests that the military, amidst the desperate pressures of World War, saw a terrifying practical application for such a theory. If you could unify these forces, the thinking goes, you might learn to manipulate gravity itself, or create a field so powerful it could warp light and bend space-time around an object, effectively making it disappear. While Einstein's direct involvement is fiercely debated, the timeline is undeniably suggestive. His work on unification was at its peak in the 1930s and 40s, precisely the period when the Philadelphia experiment is said to have occurred. We know he worked as a consultant for the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ordnance during the war, though on far more conventional explosive technology. The conspiracy theory proposes a hidden track to his consultation, a secret project where his most speculative, unpublished papers were taken from his desk and rushed into a crash development program. The notion is that a team of scientists, possibly including the brilliant John von Neumann, attempted to weaponize these nascent equations, using immense electrical power to brute force a unified field into existence around a warship. The horrific results reported teleportation, molecular instability, and temporal distortion sound less like a simple radar invisibility experiment gone wrong and more like the catastrophic side effects of tampering with the fundamental fabric of reality itself. This 20th century drive for a single, all-explaining theory mirrors a much older, yet strikingly similar, ambition that consumed the greatest minds of the medieval world. For alchemists and natural philosophers, their theory of everything was not written in tensors and field equations, but in symbols, correspondences, and the concept of the prima materia, the primordial, undifferentiated substance from which all of creation was thought to have formed. They believed that the entire universe, from the distant stars to the metals in the earth, was interconnected by a complex web of invisible influences and sympathies. The movements of the planets, the properties of herbs, and the nature of human consciousness were all seen as different expressions of the same divine, cosmic rules. Their quest was to discover the one key, often symbolized by the philosopher's stone, that would unlock this grand system and grant mastery over all of nature. A medieval alchemist would have understood Einstein's quest perfectly, though he would have used a different language. Where Einstein sought to unify gravity and electromagnetism through geometry, an alchemist like Roger Bacon or Paracelsus sought to unify the celestial and the terrestrial through astrology and the doctrine of signatures, the idea that every plant and mineral bore a physical sign of its spiritual purpose. Their elaborate laboratory processes, which appear to us as primitive chemistry, were in truth sophisticated attempts to replicate the cosmic act of creation itself, to accelerate nature's work and transmute base matter into its perfect, spiritualized form. Achieving this would have been the ultimate demonstration of their unified theory, proving that one set of spiritual laws governed everything from the growth of a seed to the orbit of Mars. The parallel reveals a profound and enduring human impulse. Whether armed with a particle accelerator or an Athena furnace, the goal remains the same: to discover the underlying simplicity behind the universe's apparent complexity. Both the physicist and the alchemist are driven by a deep-seated belief that the cosmos is ultimately orderly and comprehensible, and that finding this order confers not just knowledge but power. The tragic irony, reflected in both the legend of the Philadelphia experiment and the warnings found in alchemical texts, is that this power might be inherently unstable or dangerous when approached through imperfect understanding. The alchemists wrote extensively about the perils of pursuing the great work for greedy or arrogant reasons, warning that the forces unleashed could destroy the unprepared practitioner. The story of the USS Eldridge serves as a modern, technological version of that same ancient warning, a caution that in our rush to unify the cosmos, we might instead shatter our own world. This profound connection between the quest for invisibility in the 1940s and the pursuits of medieval adepts becomes even more striking when we examine the symbolic language they shared. The ultimate goal of the alchemist, the philosopher's stone, was far more than a substance for creating gold. Historical texts describe it as a crystalline or powdered agent of radical transformation, a key that could unlock the hidden potentials within any material, including the human body. One of the supreme powers granted by the stone, as detailed in manuscripts like the 17th century Book of Abramelin, was the ability to become unseen. This wasn't merely camouflage, it was a complete metamorphosis, a shifting of one's essence to vibrate at a frequency outside the perception of ordinary sight. The alchemists sought to spiritually refine themselves to such a degree that they could, in a sense, step sideways out of the material plane, achieving a state of glorious and intentional invisibility. This mirrors the alleged goal aboard the USS Eldridge, not to destroy the ship but to transform its relationship with light and energy, to make it vibrate in a way that would slip past enemy detection. The methods employed, though separated by centuries, also share a fascinating symbolic parallel. The alchemical process for achieving such a state was meticulously detailed in cryptic texts, often illustrated with intricate diagrams. One common symbol was the Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail. This represented the cyclical, self-contained nature of the great work, a process that required creating a perfectly sealed and balanced system where energies could be amplified and focused inward. Now consider the descriptions of the Philadelphia experiment setup. Massive Tesla coils arranged in a circle around the ship's deck, generators creating a swirling, self-contained electromagnetic field. To an alchemist, this technological apparatus would have looked like a perfect, giant-scale manifestation of the Ouroboros principle. They were both attempting to create a closed, energetic circuit where immense power could be generated and controlled to effect a miraculous transformation. One used ritual and sacred geometry to shape spiritual energy. The other used mathematics and copper wiring to shape electromagnetic energy. But the underlying architectural concept of a sealed, circular system is remarkably consistent. Furthermore, the mindset required for both endeavors reveals a deep kinship. The medieval alchemist operated within a worldview where the universe was alive, interconnected, and responsive to human intention. Their laboratory work was a sacred act preceded by prayer, meditation, and strict moral purification. They believed that to manipulate the prima materia, the fundamental substance of creation, one's own soul had to be in a state of harmony and elevated consciousness. A prideful or impure heart would inevitably corrupt the work and lead to disaster. This stands in stark contrast to the modern, purely technical mindset we often associate with military science. However, the legend of the Philadelphia experiment suggests a terrifying convergence. The scientists, in their ruthless pursuit of a tactical advantage, may have disregarded the spiritual or consciousness-based aspects of manipulating reality's fabric. They treated a profoundly metaphysical operation as a mere engineering problem. The alleged result, sailors fused with metal, phasing in and out of existence, reads like a grim alchemical allegory, a failed transmutation caused by the impurity of the operator's intentions. The vessel and its crew became the equivalent of a contaminated alembic, a botched experiment where the base, chaotic elements of matter were unleashed instead of being perfected into spiritual gold. In both frameworks, the message is the same. The power to alter reality cannot be wielded safely without a corresponding elevation of the human spirit operating the controls. When we try to pin down the facts of the Philadelphia experiment, we immediately run into a wall of silence built from missing papers and contradictory records. The most fundamental piece of evidence any historian would seek, the official deck logs of the USS Eldridge for October of 1943, is notoriously difficult to corroborate. Researchers who have requested these specific documents from the National Archives have often been met with a frustrating response. The logs for that crucial period are unavailable. The official explanation is that they were likely lost or destroyed as part of routine administrative processes common for the era. But for those who see a deeper story, this gap in the record is the first and most significant red flag, a void that feels less like an accident and more like a deliberate excision, a surgical removal of a page from history that someone decided should never be read. This pattern of elusive evidence extends beyond a single logbook. The entire paper trail for Project Rainbow, provided it existed in the form the legends suggest, has vanished into thin air. Requests filed under the Freedom of Information Act have yielded nothing conclusive, often resulting in generic responses that no such records pertain to the described event. Even the service records of sailors allegedly involved are frequently incomplete or contain curious anomalies, with dates of service not aligning perfectly with the ship's known locations. This creates a maddening cycle for investigators. The absence of proof is cited as proof that nothing happened, yet the very mechanisms that could provide that proof are the ones that appear to be malfunctioning. It forces us to ask a difficult question. Is this merely the natural entropy of old bureaucracy, or is it the hallmark of a highly effective cover-up, one designed to leave behind just enough breadcrumbs of doubt to fuel the story while ensuring no concrete evidence ever surfaces to confirm it? This tactic of controlling history by controlling its documentation is a practice with ancient roots. Throughout the medieval period, the primary keepers of knowledge were monastic scribes and scholars working under the watchful eye of the church. The production of manuscripts was an expensive, labor-intensive process, and what was copied, what was preserved, and most importantly, what was altered or left out was never an accident. It was a deliberate act of curation designed to uphold orthodox doctrine and maintain political power. If a text was deemed heretical, if it challenged the Church's teachings on astronomy, medicine, or theology, it risked being systematically sought out and destroyed. The archives of the Spanish Inquisition are filled with orders for the seizure and burning of forbidden books, entire libraries of knowledge reduced to ashes in the town square to protect the faithful from dangerous ideas. But outright destruction was not the only tool. A more subtle and insidious method was the deliberate alteration of existing manuscripts. A scribe copying an older text might correct passages that seemed theologically risky, smoothing out contradictions or adding clarifying glosses that aligned the work with current doctrine. A historical chronicle could be edited to diminish the accomplishments of a rival noble family or to embellish the piety of a patron king. In this way, the historical record itself could be quietly rewritten, generation by generation, until the original truth was buried under layers of approved narrative. The past was shaped to serve the needs of the present, and the average person would never know what information had been lost or changed. The truth became a movable feast, defined not by what actually happened, but by what the powerful allowed to be remembered. The parallel to the Philadelphia experiment is uncanny. In the medieval world, the church and state acted as the ultimate authorities, controlling the flow of information to maintain their power and stability. In the modern world, that role is often filled by the national security apparatus, where the classification of documents and the principle of need to know serve a similar purpose. The alleged suppression of the Eldridge's logs and the intimidation of witnesses follow the same timeless blueprint. A potentially destabilizing truth is identified, and the machinery of power moves to contain it, not always through brute force, but through the sophisticated and silent management of information. The outcome is the same whether you're a medieval monk ordered to burn a book or a naval clerk told a file is to be archived indefinitely. The story is stopped before it can ever truly begin. This creates a profound and frustrating dilemma for us as seekers of truth. When the official records are missing, we are forced to rely on the unofficial ones, the frantic letters of a Carlos Allende, the whispered testimonies of aging veterans, and the stubborn persistence of researchers who dedicated their lives to the puzzle. These fragments are the equivalent of the surviving scraps of heretical medieval texts that somehow escaped the bonfire, passed down secretly or buried in a jar for centuries. They are messy, emotional, and often contradictory, but they endure. They represent the human voice that the official record tried to silence. The very fact that we are still discussing this event decades later, despite the best efforts to erase it from the books, suggests that some truths are simply too powerful to be completely extinguished. They linger in the shadows of history, waiting for the right moment to step back into the light. For the sailors who allegedly survived the ordeal aboard the Eldridge, the end of the experiment was not the end of their nightmare. It was merely the beginning of a new, more private kind of hell. Discharged from the Navy, often with their records mysteriously altered or incomplete, these men returned to a world that felt fundamentally alien. Their struggles went far beyond standard post-combat trauma. They reported a constellation of bizarre and persistent phenomena that dogged their steps for the rest of their lives, turning their existence into a perpetual state of unease. Many described sudden, intense bouts of dizziness and disorientation, as if the ground beneath their feet might momentarily lose its solidity. Others lived in constant fear of abruptly vanishing in the middle of a conversation or a family meal, a terror born from the memory of their earlier involuntary phasing. These accounts include chilling stories of objects behaving in impossible ways around them. One veteran claimed that streetlights would consistently flicker and die as he walked beneath them, a phenomenon that followed him through different cities and decades. Another spoke of his wristwatch perpetually running backwards, and electronic devices like radios and televisions malfunctioning in his presence, emitting static or switching channels on their own. The most unsettling reports came from family members who described occasionally seeing a faint greenish haze or a shimmering in the air around their loved one, a fleeting echo of the fog that had enveloped the ship. These men weren't just haunted by memories, they seemed to be permanently, physically altered, carrying a residual energy from the experiment that made the mundane world react to them in profoundly unnatural ways. This notion of a person being permanently marked by a supernatural encounter is a central theme in medieval folklore. Across Europe, tales abound of individuals who stumbled into a fairy ring or witnessed a ghostly procession and were never the same again. They were often said to be fairy-taken or touched by the other world, and this contact left an indelible stain on their spirit that manifested in tangible ways. They might develop the ability to see future events or perceive hidden spirits, a gift that was often more of a curse, isolating them from their community. Others were said to bring bad luck wherever they went, their very presence causing crops to fail or livestock to sicken. Like the Eldridge sailors, these medieval figures became unwitting conduits for forces they couldn't control, their lives forever defined by a single, boundary-shattering event. The psychological toll on both groups was catastrophic. The sailors often lived in self-imposed isolation, too frightened by their own unpredictable condition to form close relationships or hold steady jobs. They were frequently diagnosed with severe paranoia or schizophrenia by doctors who had no framework for understanding their experiences. Similarly, those in the Middle Ages who were believed to be fairy-touched were often ostracized from their villages. Their stories of encountering the supernatural were met not with belief but with fear and suspicion. They were viewed as dangerous, unstable, or cursed, and were often driven to the edges of society, forced to live as hermits or wanderers. In both cases, the initial trauma was compounded by a profound social isolation. The very thing that made their experience unique was also what made them irreparably alone. Perhaps the most poignant parallel lies in the quiet, desperate attempts to find answers. Some of the aging sailors sought each other out in later years, forming a fragile network of mutual support, the only people on Earth who could truly understand what the other had been through without judgment. They exchanged letters and held secret meetings, their conversations a mix of shared trauma and futile attempts to piece together what had been done to them. This mirrors the medieval practice of a person who believed themselves cursed seeking out a wise woman or a cunning man at the edge of the forest, someone rumored to understand the ways of the unseen world. They would barter for charms, potions, or prayers in a desperate attempt to lift the mark upon them, to feel normal and grounded in their own world again. This search for understanding, for any thread that could lead back to a life of normalcy, is a deeply human response to the inexplicable, a testament to the enduring hope that even the deepest wounds can someday be healed. Of course, not every strange tale is a hidden truth, and a critical eye is essential when examining stories as extraordinary as the Philadelphia experiment. From a skeptical perspective, the entire saga is a textbook example of how a mixture of misidentification, psychological phenomena, and deliberate fiction can coalesce into a powerful modern myth. Skeptical investigators point to the complete absence of any verifiable first-hand testimony from crew members who were actually aboard the USS Eldridge during the alleged event. The most famous source, Carlos Allende, provided wildly inconsistent details and was deemed an unreliable narrator by nearly every researcher who attempted to verify his claims. His dramatic letters are often categorized not as evidence, but as the creative spark that ignited a cultural firestorm, a work of science fiction that found a willing audience in a post-war world increasingly fascinated with UFOs and government secrets. Many of the specific effects described by witnesses have compelling, non-supernatural explanations rooted in known science and human psychology. The severe disorientation, nausea, and memory loss reported by sailors align perfectly with the symptoms of high-energy electromagnetic field exposure, which was a very real area of military research at the time. Specifically, the process of degaussing a ship's hull to protect against magnetic mines. Being near powerful degaussing coils could indeed induce vertigo, temporary confusion, and even mild hallucinations. Furthermore, the intense pressure and isolation of naval service during wartime are fertile ground for mass psychogenic illness, a form of mass hysteria where psychological distress manifests as physical symptoms within a group. In this light, the shared traumatic experience could be a collective psychological response to a frightening, but ultimately conventional military procedure gone awry, with stories growing more elaborate with each retelling. This rational approach to dismissing the inexplicable is far from a modern invention. Even in the deeply superstitious Middle Ages, there were brilliant minds who pushed back against the urge to label every unusual event a miracle or a demonic act. Scholars in the tradition of medieval rationalism, inspired by the rediscovered works of Aristotle and other classical thinkers, sought natural explanations for seemingly supernatural occurrences. A philosopher like William of Ockham, famous for his principle that the simplest explanation is usually the correct one, would likely have been deeply skeptical of claims about a vanishing warship. He would have first looked for errors in perception, flaws in the witness's account, or natural phenomena that could mimic the described effects before ever entertaining a fantastical conclusion. Medieval natural philosophers often attributed so-called miracles to rare but understandable natural events. The sudden appearance of a ghostly army in the sky, for instance, might be explained as an unusual cloud formation or a trick of the light known as a Fata Morgana mirage. A person believed to be possessed and speaking in tongues might be diagnosed with epilepsy or a severe mental illness. These thinkers operated on the belief that the natural world created by God operated on a set of consistent and discoverable rules. To them, invoking a miracle or a demon was a lazy explanation, a failure to fully investigate the intricate and often surprising mechanisms of nature itself. Their methodology was a precursor to the modern scientific principle: observe, hypothesize, and seek a logical cause before accepting a supernatural one. The enduring power of the Philadelphia experiment legend, therefore, may tell us less about secret government projects and more about the timeless human need for wonder and the patterns our minds impose on chaos. Our brains are hardwired to seek cause and effect, to weave disconnected threads into a coherent narrative. When faced with a gap in our understanding, be it a missing naval logbook or a strange light in the sky, we have a choice. We can either accept the limits of our knowledge and attribute it to a mundane cause we haven't yet identified, or we can fill that void with a story that satisfies our deeper yearning for mystery and meaning. The skeptic and the medieval rationalist choose the first path, finding solace in the order of the natural world. The believer and the mystic choose the second, finding magic in the unknown. This fundamental tension between the need for a rational explanation and the desire for a magical one is the true engine that has kept this story alive for decades. Yet for all its scientific and historical intrigue, the story of the Philadelphia experiment might have remained an obscure footnote known only to a handful of researchers had it not been for its explosive entry into popular culture. This journey from whispered rumor to full-blown modern myth began in earnest with a book and a series of strange letters. Astronomer and author Morris K. Jessup's work on UFOs and anti-gravity, particularly his 1955 book, The Case for the UFO, inadvertently became the catalyst. It was this publication that prompted Carlos Allen to reach out with his frantic, rambling correspondence, claiming first-hand knowledge of a terrifying naval experiment that proved the government was hiding advanced physics from the public. These letters, filled with wild claims and technical jargon, were bizarre enough to pique the interest of others within the burgeoning UFO research community, but it was a second, even stranger event that truly launched the legend. An annotated copy of Jessup's book arrived in the office of the U.S. Navy's Office of Naval Research. Its pages were filled with notes written in 3 different colors of ink, appearing to be a conversation between 3 individuals who displayed an astonishing grasp of advanced physics and hyperspace theory. This Varro edition, named after the defense contractor that later published it, seemed to confirm the existence of a shadowy group with insider knowledge. While its authenticity is heavily debated, the very existence of this document lent an air of sinister credibility to the story, creating a feedback loop of speculation and intrigue that pushed the tale from the fringes into a wider public consciousness. It was the perfect fuel for a post-war America already simmering with distrust of authority and a growing fascination with the paranormal. The story's next great leap came with the power of cinema. The 1984 film, The Philadelphia Experiment, took the core elements of the legend: the ship, the green fog, the teleportation, and the tragic fate of the crew, and wove them into a compelling science fiction adventure. While taking significant creative liberties, the movie introduced the story to millions who had never heard of Morris Jessup or Carlos Allen. It visualized the horror of sailors phasing through solid metal and the desperation of a man out of time, making the abstract terror of the story visceral and immediate. This cinematic treatment didn't just report the myth, it amplified and crystallized it, establishing the imagery and narrative beats that would define the Philadelphia experiment in the public imagination for decades to come. This process of a mysterious tale being captured, amplified, and spread through popular media is a dynamic with a very long history. Centuries before film or mass-market paperbacks, the mysterious and the occult captivated audiences through a different medium, the grimoire. These handwritten books of magic, like the Key of Solomon or the Lesser Key of Solomon, were the medieval and early modern equivalents of bestsellers, passed from hand to hand in secret, copied and recopied, each iteration adding new layers of myth and elaboration. They promised readers access to incredible powers, command over spirits, invisibility, the discovery of hidden treasure, much like the Philadelphia legend promised a glimpse of hidden government technology. The grimoires were more than instruction manuals. They were repositories of folklore, fear, and fascination, their reputations growing more potent with each retelling, their origins often attributed to mythical or biblical figures to enhance their authority. Just as the movie adaptation simplified and dramatized the Philadelphia story for a new audience, medieval folklore took complex local tales and refined them into universal archetypes. Stories of encounters with the fairy folk, once specific to a particular village or region, were collected and repackaged in written forms that could travel across countries, their details becoming more standardized and their moral lessons more clearly defined. This is how we ended up with widespread, recognizable motifs like the fairy ring, the forbidden name, or the witch's familiar. These stories were the pop culture of their day, told and retold around firesides, their outlines familiar even if their details shifted from one teller to the next. They served the same purpose as our modern conspiracy theories and sci-fi films, to make sense of the unknown, to explore the boundaries of fear and wonder, and to question the nature of the reality presented to us by those in power. The enduring appeal of both the Philadelphia experiment and these ancient mysteries lies in this powerful combination of fear and fascination. They tap into a deep-seated anxiety that the world is not as it seems, that hidden forces are at work just beyond the edge of our perception. Whether the hidden force is a clandestine military project manipulating space-time or a secret society of adepts possessing forbidden knowledge, the emotional effect on the audience is strikingly similar. It creates a sense of thrilling unease, a feeling that if you just look a little deeper, you might uncover a truth that changes everything. This is why these stories are so endlessly adaptable. They provide a Chinese letter, a set of compelling icons, a vanishing ship, a green fog, a magical book, a fairy ring that can be explored again and again, each new adaptation adding another layer to the myth and ensuring its survival for the next generation of curious minds. This speculation leads us down one of the most shadowy and controversial paths in the entire Philadelphia experiment narrative: the potential involvement of occult societies who were themselves the inheritors of medieval esoteric traditions. It's a theory that suggests the project's architects may have been drawing from a much older and far more dangerous well of knowledge than anything found in a standard physics textbook. During the rise of the Nazi regime in Germany, organizations like the Thule Society became infamous for their obsession with locating ancient power sources, from the Holy Grail to the mythical city of Hyperborea, believing these artifacts held the key to unlocking supernatural abilities and ensuring Aryan dominance. While their focus was on mythic Aryanism, their methods involved deep diving into exactly the kind of medieval grimoires and alchemical texts that detailed procedures for invisibility and transmutation. The terrifying notion is that some of this researched ideology, or even actual recovered documents, could have been seized by Allied intelligence operations after the war and funneled into other black projects, including the work on the Eldridge, in a desperate race to control any potential advantage. On the other side of the ideological spectrum, but equally immersed in the occult, was the Ordo Templi Orientis, or OTO, an organization deeply influenced by the enigmatic magician Aleister Crowley and his system of the lemma. Crowley's work was itself a sophisticated reinterpretation of Renaissance and medieval ceremonial magic, and he famously claimed the ability to render himself invisible through intense acts of will and ritual. His detailed journals document these attempts, framing invisibility not as a physical trick, but as a profound psychological and spiritual operation that altered the practitioner's relationship with consensus reality. The legend proposes that figures within the OTO or with connections to Crowley's teachings might have been consulted, not as physicists, but as specialists in consciousness and perception, experts in the very subjective, human elements of reality manipulation that a purely technical approach would have completely overlooked. Their role would have been to provide the missing metaphysical piece of the puzzle, the operator's manual for the human soul that the engineers had forgotten to write. This fusion of cutting-edge science and ancient occult practice wouldn't have been a mere coincidence. It would have been a deliberate synthesis based on a shared underlying belief. Both the medieval alchemist and the 20th century physicist were, in their own ways, trying to decode the fundamental operating system of the universe. The alchemist used the symbolic language of the emerald tablet, which declares, "as above, so below," believing that the macrocosm of the stars and the microcosm of the human laboratory were reflections of one another. The physicist used the mathematical language of unified field theory, seeking a single set of equations to describe all cosmic forces. The radical idea is that members of these secret societies understood these were not competing worldviews, but two different dialects describing the same profound truth. They might have argued that to successfully manipulate the physical field around a ship, you first had to understand the spiritual and consciousness-based laws that governed it, principles they believed had been meticulously mapped out by adepts over centuries and guarded within their orders. If such a collaboration did occur, it would provide a hauntingly elegant explanation for the experiment's catastrophic outcome, particularly the severe psychological effects on the crew. From a purely occult perspective, the rituals designed to achieve invisibility were never intended for a group of unprepared individuals trapped inside a metal hull. They were meant for a single, highly trained adept who had undergone years of rigorous mental and spiritual purification to withstand the tremendous psychic pressures of shifting between states of being. The sailor on the deck of the Eldridge was the absolute antithesis of this prepared operator. He was a conscript, likely terrified and completely unaware of the non-physical forces he was about to be subjected to. In this framework, the mental shattering, the phasing, and the fusion with the ship weren't just technical malfunctions. They were the inevitable result of applying a powerful consciousness-altering technology on unprepared human subjects. It was the equivalent of giving a child the controls to a nuclear reactor. The machinery might be impressive, but the operator was utterly unqualified to handle the energy flowing through it, leading to a disaster that was spiritual and psychological as much as it was physical. Perhaps the most profound and mind-expanding theory to emerge from the law suggests the experiment's true failure was one of targeting, that the immense electromagnetic field did not simply cloak the ship, but instead ripped a temporary hole in the very fabric of space-time, briefly accessing a realm of existence completely separate from our own. In this view, the USS Eldridge didn't vanish, it was translated. The reported teleportation to Norfolk and the bizarre temporal slips experienced by the crew are reinterpreted not as movement through our universe, but as a momentary crossing into a different dimensional plane, a hyperspatial realm where the normal rules of physics simply do not apply. The searing green fog and the resonant hum described by witnesses become the sensory signature of this dimensional breach, the visible and audible stress of reality itself being forced open. This idea of a hidden reality, a world just beyond the veil of our own, is a concept that would have been instantly familiar to a medieval mystic. They called it the astral plane, a subtle, non-physical dimension of existence thought to interpenetrate our own material world, yet normally invisible to the naked eye. Medieval alchemists and magicians believed this astral realm was the source of all magical power, the place where thoughts and intentions could take form, and where a skilled adept could travel in their spiritual body to acquire knowledge or influence events from a distance. Accessing this plane was not considered a scientific accident, but the highest achievement of spiritual discipline, requiring intense concentration, purified intent, and often the use of specially consecrated mirrors, crystals, or magical circles that acted as focusing lenses for consciousness. To them, the Eldridge's generators might look like a crude, violent, and horrifyingly imprecise method of achieving the same goal, blasting a hole into the astral with raw power instead of gracefully entering it with trained will. The experiences of the sailors in this theoretical hyperspace bear a shocking resemblance to medieval and folkloric accounts of individuals who accidentally stumbled into the fairy realms. Across countless European traditions, these encounters follow a distinct pattern. A person walking through a misty glen or near an ancient barrow mound might suddenly find the world has changed around them. The colors are more vivid, the air hums with a strange energy, and time seems to lose all meaning. This is precisely the disorientation and sensory overload described by the crew. The howling silence, the impossible colors, the profound vertigo of being unmoored from familiar reality. Both the modern sailor and the medieval peasant who stepped into a fairy ring encountered a dimension that operated on a different set of rules, a place that was not meant for human beings and whose very energy was toxic to an unprepared visitor. The most chilling parallel lies in the aftermath, the phenomenon of phasing. The sailors who flickered in and out of visibility for weeks after the experiment were not just suffering from a technical glitch. From this perspective, they were partially stuck. Their molecular structure had been fundamentally altered by the transition, leaving them perpetually out of phase, their existence flickering between our dimension and the one they had briefly visited. This is a near-perfect echo of the folkloric concept of being fairy-taken. Those who returned from an encounter with the good people were never quite right again. They were often described as distant, prone to vanishing from sight for moments at a time, and carrying a lingering glamour or otherworldly aura about them. They were seen as permanent travelers, their souls never fully able to return to the mortal world after brushing against the fabric of the impossible. The fate of the Eldridge's crew, in this light, becomes a terrifying technological retelling of the oldest warning in the world, that some doors once opened cannot be fully closed, and those who pass through them risk never being whole again. Yet the haunting legacy of the Eldridge is far from alone in the annals of unexplained history. To truly appreciate its place in our collective imagination, we can place it alongside other enduring enigmas that similarly defy easy explanation, each one a stubborn puzzle piece that refuses to fit into our conventional understanding of the world. Consider the infamous case of the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine discovered adrift in the Atlantic in 1872, perfectly seaworthy with its cargo intact, yet completely abandoned by its entire crew. The captain's log showed no sign of distress, the lifeboat was missing, and the personal effects of the sailors were left behind, as if they had vanished into thin air mid-voyage. Like the Philadelphia experiment, the mystery of the Mary Celeste is defined not by what was found, but by what was absent, a crew that disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a perfectly preserved vessel as a ghostly monument to their unknown fate. Both stories present us with a scene of profound and unsettling ambiguity, a snapshot of a moment where the normal rules of human experience seem to have been suspended. Moving into the 20th century, the tragic incident at Dyatlov Pass in 1959 offers another compelling parallel. 9 experienced Soviet hikers were found dead in the Ural Mountains under circumstances that remain utterly baffling. Their tent was slit open from the inside, as if they fled in a sudden, panicked rush, abandoning their supplies in the sub-zero temperatures. Some victims were found in various states of undress. Others had massive internal injuries but no external wounds, and traces of radioactivity were reportedly found on their clothing. Official investigations have cycled through theories ranging from avalanches and infrasound-induced panic to military testing or even Yeti attacks. Yet no single explanation satisfactorily covers all the bizarre evidence. This event shares with the Philadelphia story a core element of technological or scientific horror, the suggestion that ordinary people, highly skilled in their environment, were suddenly and violently overcome by an invisible, incomprehensible force that left behind a chaotic and contradictory crime scene. In both cases, the official narratives feel inadequate, forcing us to confront the possibility of phenomena that lie outside the boundaries of accepted science. If we journey further back in time, we find that this pattern of inexplicable events is a recurring theme in human history, often explained through the language of folklore and superstition when scientific vocabulary was unavailable. A stunning medieval counterpart to these modern mysteries is the strange account of the Green Children of Woolpit. According to 12th century chronicles, during the reign of King Stephen, 2 children with green-tinted skin were discovered near the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, England. They spoke an unknown language, wore clothes of a strange material, and would eat only raw beans. Once they learned English, the boy, who was sickly, eventually died, but the girl survived and adapted, later losing her green coloration. She explained that they came from a twilight land called St. Martin's Land, where the sun never shone and all the people were green, and that they had arrived in Woolpit after following the sound of bells into a cavern. This account, recorded by reputable chroniclers of the time, has been interpreted in countless ways as a folk tale, a description of extraterrestrial visitors, a metaphorical story about Flemish immigrants, or a genuine historical encounter with children who were lost, disoriented, and suffering from a condition like chlorosis. The connection to the Philadelphia experiment lies in the profound sense of displacement and the crossing of boundaries. The green children were utterly out of place temporally, linguistically, and even physiologically. They were visitors from an unknown elsewhere whose very presence challenged the worldview of those who found them. The sailors of the Eldridge in the legends also became strangers in their own world, psychologically and physically displaced by an event that severed their connection to a shared, stable reality. Both narratives explore the terror and the fascination of the outsider, the being who does not belong and whose existence implies that our understanding of the world is incomplete. The Green Girl of Woolpit, assimilating into English society, is a medieval echo of the Philadelphia sailor trying to reintegrate into a post-war America, both bearing the invisible scars of a journey they can never fully explain. What binds these mysteries together, from a vanished 19th century crew to panicked hikers in the Soviet wilderness, from green-skinned children in a medieval field to sailors allegedly fused with their ship, is not a shared solution but a shared human response. We are pattern-seeking creatures, and when faced with an event that resists all logical patterns, we are compelled to create stories. The Mary Celeste inspires tales of pirate attacks, sea monsters, or waterspouts. Dyatlov Pass fuels speculation about secret weapons or malevolent cryptids. The green children of Woolpit were explained by their contemporaries as coming from a subterranean fairy realm. The Philadelphia experiment is framed as a runaway military project in unified field theory. The specific explanations are products of their time, dressed in the vocabulary of their era, be it demons, fairies, or hyperspace, but the underlying impulse is timeless. We use these narratives to build a framework around the void of the unknown, to impose order on the chaos of an event that fundamentally challenges our perception of a safe, predictable, and understandable universe. These mysteries endure not because we have solved them, but because they continue to ask us the most profound questions about the limits of our knowledge and the nature of reality itself. The story of the Philadelphia experiment did more than just spawn a single conspiracy theory. It effectively provided the foundational blueprint for an entire genre of modern American folklore centered on clandestine government projects. This single, enigmatic event became a powerful narrative seed, germinating into a sprawling forest of conspiracy culture that encompasses everything from mind control programs and reverse-engineered alien technology to secret pacts with extraterrestrial beings. The core components of the legend, a secretive military operation, advanced physics bordering on magic, an official cover-up, and tragic human experimentation, established a formula that would be reused and repurposed for decades. It taught a generation of researchers and storytellers what to look for: the missing documents, the intimidated witnesses, the technological leaps that seemed to appear out of nowhere. This framework provided a seemingly rational structure for exploring the inexplicable, offering a language to articulate the deep-seated public suspicion that the true workings of power are always hidden behind a veil of national security. This modern framework finds a profound and ancient echo in the fears that permeated medieval society. Where we today might suspect a covert meeting in a Pentagon briefing room or a hidden laboratory under the Nevada desert, a medieval peasant feared the secret gatherings of a witch's coven in a moonlit forest or a cabal of heretics plotting in a hidden chamber. The underlying anxiety is identical: the belief that unseen groups are manipulating the world from the shadows, orchestrating events that shape the lives of ordinary people who are utterly powerless to stop them. The medieval witch was the ultimate scapegoat, blamed for failed crops, stillborn children, and unexpected illnesses. Her alleged pact with the devil was evidence of a hidden network dedicated to undermining the Christian world. Similarly, the modern conspiracy theorist sees the hand of a clandestine group like the Illuminati or a secret government agency behind economic collapses, political assassinations, and societal shifts, believing in a different kind of pact made not with Satan, but with alien beings or in exchange for ultimate technological power. The tools of these hidden manipulators have simply evolved with the times. The medieval imagination feared potions, cursed effigies, and spells cast to summon plagues or storms, weapons that attack the body, the soul, and the very elements. Today, we fear psychotronic weapons, satellite-based mind control, and chemtrails, advanced technologies that allegedly manipulate thought, weather, and biology. The means are different, reflecting the predominant anxieties of their respective eras, but the intended outcome is the same: the silent, subversive control of the masses by a privileged few who possess forbidden knowledge. The alchemist in his private laboratory, seeking the philosopher's stone to gain untold influence, is the direct ancestor of the modern rogue scientist in a DARPA-funded lab, allegedly working on teleportation or time travel for his shadowy patrons. Both figures represent the terrifying idea that ultimate knowledge is not used for the enlightenment of all, but is hoarded and weaponized by an elite few. This enduring cultural narrative speaks to a fundamental human need to make sense of chaos. It is often easier to believe in a deliberately malevolent, hidden plan than to accept the terrifying randomness of fate, the incompetence of leaders, or the sheer complexity of global events. A world controlled by a cabal, whether it's a circle of medieval warlocks or a committee of unelected bureaucrats in a think tank, is a frightening place, but it is also an orderly one. It suggests that someone is at the wheel, even if they are driving us toward disaster. This provides a perverse sense of comfort. It means events have a reason, even if that reason is malign. The chaos is not senseless, it is orchestrated. The Philadelphia experiment, with its clear villains and victims, its secretive purpose and catastrophic outcome, perfectly satisfies this deep psychological craving for a story that makes sense of the senseless, offering a compelling, if terrifying, explanation for why the world feels so out of control. Ultimately, the journey from the fear of a medieval witch's curse to the fear of a clandestine government project like the Philadelphia experiment reveals a continuous thread in the human psyche. We have always been storytellers trying to map the invisible landscapes of power using the vocabulary available to us. The language has shifted from demons and spirits to extraterrestrials and zero-point energy, but the song remains the same. It is a ballad of suspicion, a lament for lost agency, and a warning that the greatest threats are often the ones we cannot see. The legacy of the Eldridge is not just a wild tale about a vanishing ship. It is a modern vessel for one of our oldest and most persistent fears, that the true rulers of our world operate in a darkness we can never fully illuminate, pulling levers we were never meant to see. At the very cutting edge of modern theoretical physics lies a concept so bizarre it seems to defy all common sense: quantum entanglement. This is the strange phenomenon where two particles, once linked, can become inextricably bound together, their fates intertwined across any distance. Change the property of one particle, its spin, for instance, and its entangled partner will instantly reflect that change, whether it's in the next room or on the other side of the galaxy. This spooky action at a distance, as Einstein himself called it, suggests a profound and invisible connection between all things, a hidden layer of reality where separation is an illusion and everything is part of a single, unified whole. It's a cornerstone of quantum mechanics, and it points toward a universe far more interconnected than we ever imagined. This idea of an invisible, instantaneous connection binding separate objects is not a new revelation of 20th century science. It is, in fact, one of the oldest and most fundamental principles of medieval magic, known as the law of sympathy or sympathetic magic. This ancient world, you held that objects or beings that had once been in contact continued to influence each other long after they were parted. A magician could, for example, create a wax effigy of a person, incorporating a lock of their hair or a clipping from their fingernail. Any action performed on that doll, piercing it with a pin, melting it by a fire, would be mystically transmitted and felt by the person it represented, no matter how far away they were. This was the medieval understanding of a non-local connection, a belief that the universe was woven together by threads of invisible influence that could be manipulated by those who knew the rules. The parallel between these two ideas, separated by centuries, is nothing short of astonishing. The quantum physicist describes a universe where particles communicate instantaneously through a mechanism we don't yet understand, a reality where space is not a barrier. The medieval magician described a universe where all things are linked by a web of symbolic and energetic correspondences, a reality where a symbol could directly affect its distant counterpart. Both are grappling with the same profound mystery, the true, hidden nature of connection in our universe. One uses complex mathematics and particle accelerators to probe this mystery. The other used ritual, symbol, and an intuitive faith in the interconnectedness of all creation. When we re-examine the alleged mechanics of the Philadelphia experiment through this lens, the project takes on an entirely new and deeply eerie dimension. The standard interpretation is that the Navy was simply using powerful electromagnetism to bend light. But what if they were accidentally or intentionally tapping into something far deeper? The massive electromagnetic generators circling the deck of the Eldridge may have done more than just create a field. They could have acted as a brutal technological ritual, forcing a state of quantum entanglement on a macro scale. The ship and its crew, subjected to this immense unifying energy, might have become entangled with the very space around them, or even with a different point in space-time entirely. This wouldn't be simple teleportation. It would be a horrific violation of natural law, violently snapping the ship from one entangled state to another, from Philadelphia to Norfolk and back again, with the organic human body utterly unprepared for such a fundamental disruption. This perspective offers a chillingly elegant explanation for the most bizarre physical effects reported by witnesses. The sailors who were found fused with the metal of the ship itself represent a catastrophic failure of this entanglement. Their molecules and the ship's steel, subjected to the same field, may have literally lost their individual identity, their quantum states becoming permanently and horrifically linked in a solid state of matter. They didn't just get stuck, they became one with the vessel, a living testament to an entanglement that could not be undone. Similarly, the men who continued to phase in and out of existence long after the experiment were suffering from a residual quantum instability. Their personal wave function, the quantum probability of where and when they should be, had been so severely damaged that it continued to fluctuate randomly, causing them to decohere from our reality and momentarily vanish, only to snap back moments later, terrified and disoriented. In this light, the scientists aboard the Eldridge were not so different from the medieval sorcerer attempting a dangerous ritual of sympathetic binding. The magician used a personal item to create a symbolic entanglement with his target, believing the symbolic link would transmit his will across the miles. The physicists, whether they realized it or not, may have been using a crushing electromagnetic field to create a physical entanglement between the ship and a target location. Both operators were attempting to manipulate the hidden connective tissue of the universe. The key difference, and perhaps the source of the catastrophe, was one of understanding and respect. The medieval practitioner, working within a spiritual framework, understood these forces as conscious and alive, requiring careful preparation, protective circles, and purified intent. The physicists, viewing it as a mere engineering problem, applied unimaginable power without any of those safeguards, treating a sacred, living universe like a machine to be forcefully rewired. The result was not a controlled application of science, but a dark and destructive perversion of an ancient magical principle, unleashing forces upon human beings that they were never meant to endure. For the families left behind, the silence from the Navy was often more devastating than the official story of denial. They weren't dealing with an abstract conspiracy theory. They were living with the tangible, heartbreaking aftermath of a loved one who returned home profoundly and permanently altered. One woman, the daughter of a sailor reportedly aboard the Eldridge, described her childhood as being shrouded in a constant, low-grade fear. Her father was a kind man, she said, but he was never truly present. He would experience what she called absences, moments where he would stare into space, his eyes losing focus, and he would be completely unreachable for minutes at a time. The family learned not to startle him during these episodes, as he would often return with a gasp of terror, sweating and disoriented. He refused to go near large bodies of water and would experience panic attacks during thunderstorms, convinced the static in the air and the buzzing of power lines were somehow connected to him personally. This wasn't the father who had gone off to war. This was a man who had come back with a piece of his soul seemingly left behind in some unimaginable place. Another account comes from the grandson of a different crew member who spoke of a strange and unsettling legacy that seemed to ripple through his family. His grandfather, like many others, was allegedly subjected to aggressive medical treatments and intense debriefings after the incident, ordered never to speak of what he saw. But the trauma, it seemed, was not so easily contained. The grandson described a family history peppered with bizarre neurological conditions and a higher-than-average incidence of twins in every generation, a phenomenon he half-jokingly referred to as the Eldridge Echo, a genetic stutter from whatever forces had scrambled his grandfather's very DNA. More seriously, he believed a predisposition to severe migraines, accompanied by visual auras described as geometric patterns and green static, ran in his family line. For them, the experiment wasn't a story, it was an inherited condition, a ghost in their genetic code passed down like a cursed heirloom. This idea of trauma or strange afflictions echoing through a bloodline is a narrative deeply embedded in the human psyche, and it finds a powerful mirror in the medieval belief in ancestral curses. In the Middle Ages, misfortune was rarely seen as random chance. A family plagued by illness, stillbirths, or financial ruin was often thought to be under a divine curse or, more darkly, the target of a witch's maleficium, a harmful spell cast generations earlier. The sins of the father were literally visited upon the sons, with a family's bad luck traced back to a forgotten ancestor's pact with dark forces, their betrayal of a sacred oath, or their desecration of a holy site. This curse wasn't just a spiritual mark, it was believed to manifest in tangible ways: physical deformities, mental instability, or a susceptibility to supernatural attack that could haunt a family for centuries until properly absolved by a priest or cunning folk. The parallel with the generational effects described by the sailors' families is haunting. Where a medieval family might attribute a child's epilepsy to a great-grandfather's heresy, a modern family sees a pattern of neurological disorders and wonders if it stems from a great-grandfather's exposure to an experimental energy field. The framework for understanding the tragedy is different genetics versus divine punishment, but the emotional experience is strikingly similar. It is the profound sense that a past event, shrouded in secrecy and shame, has cast a long shadow over the present, defining the lives of people who had no part in the original transgression. It transforms personal suffering into a chapter of a larger, more ominous family saga, a story of a debt incurred by an ancestor that the descendants are somehow obligated to pay. This connection to the past also manifests in more positive, though still puzzling, ways. A handful of descendants have reported what they perceive as unexpected blessings mixed with the struggle. Some speak of a heightened intuitive sense, an almost preternatural ability to predict events or sense the emotional states of others with uncanny accuracy. Others mention a familial aptitude for understanding complex spatial relationships or advanced mathematics, skills that seem to appear out of nowhere in subsequent generations. From their perspective, the same event that fractured their grandfather's mind may have also accidentally unlocked some latent, non-local potential within their family's consciousness, a side effect of being violently unmoored from conventional reality. This notion of a family receiving a mixed legacy from an otherworldly encounter also has its medieval counterpart, the concept of a fairy blessing. Folklore is filled with stories of families who gained unusual talents, healing abilities, or even artistic genius after an ancestor helped a fairy or received its favor. A seventh son of a seventh son might be born with the power to heal scrofula. A family known for its beautiful music might trace its gift back to a forebear who spent a night in a fairy mound and returned with a melody no mortal had ever heard. This wasn't a curse, but a dangerous gift, a connection to a realm of magic that came with its own set of rules and potential taboos. The modern descendants who speak of heightened intuition or sudden genius are, in a sense, telling the same story. They are navigating the same ambiguous territory, trying to understand how a terrifying event could simultaneously be a source of both profound burden and unexpected, almost magical inheritance. Their experiences suggest that the consequences of crossing the boundary between worlds are never simple. They are a complex tapestry of light and shadow, weaving through generations, leaving a legacy that is as much about potential as it is about pain. Following the war's end, the USS Eldridge, now a vessel wrapped in whispers and dread, did not simply fade into a quiet retirement. Instead, it embarked on a second, far more conventional life, one that stands in stark contrast to the supernatural legends clinging to its hull. Decommissioned from the U.S. Navy in 1946, the ship was placed in reserve, a ghost of its former self waiting in silence. Then, in 1951, as part of a broader Cold War strategy to bolster Allied navies, the Eldridge was transferred to the Hellenic Navy of Greece. Renamed the HS Leon after a mythical hero of Greek antiquity, the ship served for another 40 years as a destroyer escort, a quiet sentinel in the Mediterranean. It's a profound irony that a ship allegedly at the center of a reality-bending experiment should spend its final decades performing the most mundane and earthly of duties, patrols, exercises, and showing the flag. For the Greek sailors who served aboard the Leon, it was simply a ship, a tough, reliable old workhorse with a long history, utterly unaware of the dark and spectacular mythology that had grown around its original name an ocean away. This final chapter of service came to a close in 1992. Deemed obsolete and too costly to maintain, the former Eldridge was sold for scrap and dismantled, its metal hull cut apart and melted down to be reborn as something entirely new and anonymous. There is a certain poignant finality to this end. A ship that legends say vanished into another dimension was ultimately destroyed by the most literal and industrial of processes. The act of scrapping feels like the ultimate attempt at erasure, a methodical dismantling not just of a physical object, but of a potential focal point for mystery. With the ship itself gone, the story is untethered from any tangible proof, free to float entirely in the realm of myth and speculation. It becomes a ghost story without a haunted house, a legend that can never be confirmed or denied by examining the artifact at its center. This deliberate destruction of a powerful object to sever its cultural or mystical significance is a practice with a deep and ancient history. Throughout the medieval period, the most common and effective way for a new religious or political power to establish its dominance was to systematically dismantle the sacred relics and sites of the old order. When Christian missionaries moved into pagan lands across Europe, they didn't just preach new doctrines, they actively sought out and destroyed the physical symbols of the old faith. Ancient groves considered sacred were chopped down. Standing stones believed to be conduits of earthly power or markers of ley lines were toppled and buried. Idols and totems were burned or broken, their power literally shattered to demonstrate the superiority of the new god. The reasoning behind this was not merely symbolic, it was deeply psychological. These objects were not seen as simple stone or wood. They were believed to be vessels of numinous power, anchors for spiritual forces, and repositories of collective memory. A sacred spring was not just a source of water, it was the home of a nymph or a spirit. To destroy it was to demystify the world, to break the connection between the people and the land they believed was alive. By melting down a pagan ceremonial cauldron or defacing an ancient altar, the new authorities were performing a kind of spiritual surgery, cutting out the heart of the old beliefs to make room for the new. They understood that to conquer a culture, you must first dismantle its icons. In this light, the scrapping of the USS Eldridge can be viewed as a modern, secular version of this ancient practice. Whether motivated by a simple economic decision or a more conscious desire to lay a troublesome rumor to rest, the result was the same, the elimination of a potent symbol. For those who believed the Philadelphia experiment was a real and catastrophic event, the ship was a haunted relic, a tomb for souls lost between worlds and a permanent, floating testament to a terrible scientific hubris. Its continued existence was a danger, a constant reminder of a failure that needed to be buried. By reducing it to scrap metal, any lingering power or curse was neutralized, and the story could be more easily dismissed as a fable. The physical evidence was rendered into an abstract, untraceable pile of raw material. Just as a pagan idol, once burned, becomes mere ash, its form and meaning lost forever. The destruction of the object is the first step toward controlling the narrative of its history. The drive to test these incredible claims did not end with the closing of the official files. It simply moved from the naval yard to the laboratory. In the decades since the story first emerged, several independent researchers and physicists have attempted to recreate the alleged conditions of the Philadelphia experiment on a smaller, safer scale, hoping to catch a glimpse of the bizarre effects described by witnesses. These modern experiments typically focus on the core premise, using powerful, controlled electromagnetic fields to manipulate light and matter. Scientists have built sophisticated coils and generators designed to produce intense, localized fields, sometimes surrounding small objects or even chambers in an effort to induce invisibility or spatial distortion. The results, while fascinating, have been far from the legendary vanishing of a destroyer. Researchers have documented minor optical effects, such as the slight bending of light around an object, a crude form of mirage, and anomalies in electronic equipment within the field. Some have even reported strange sensory experiences, like a metallic taste in the air or a persistent humming sound, but nothing on the scale of teleportation or molecular transmutation. These efforts highlight the immense chasm between theoretical physics and the practical application of such world-altering concepts, demonstrating just how much energy and control would be required to achieve what was allegedly done in 1943. This relentless pursuit of replicating a legendary feat is a story as old as human ambition itself, finding a direct and colorful parallel in the tireless work of medieval magicians and alchemists. These seekers were endlessly trying to recreate the miraculous achievements they read about in ancient grimoires and manuscripts. A text might describe a legendary sage who could become invisible using a specific ring forged during a planetary alignment, and for generations afterward, countless adepts would attempt to follow the same cryptic instructions, mixing rare herbs, inscribing complex sigils on metal discs, and waiting for the perfect astrological moment to complete their work. Their results were just as mixed as those of the modern physicists. While most attempts ended in failure, the historical record does contain intriguing accounts of partial successes. Stories of practitioners who claim to achieve a faint blurring of their outline, a momentary difficulty in being perceived, or an ability to move through a crowded room completely unnoticed. These were not the spectacular vanishings of legend, but for those who experienced them, they were proof that they were on the right path, that the ancient knowledge held a kernel of truth waiting to be unlocked by a sufficiently skilled and devoted operator. The critical difference between then and now lies in the framework for understanding failure. When a modern scientific experiment fails to produce the desired result, the conclusion is typically that the hypothesis was incorrect, the methodology was flawed, or the underlying theory needs revision. The data is analyzed and the process moves forward incrementally. For the medieval magician, failure was rarely seen as a disproof of the theory. Instead, it was almost always attributed to a flaw in the operator. Perhaps the magician's will was not focused enough, his heart was not pure, or he made a tiny error in the elaborate ritual using vervain instead of verbena, or beginning the incantation a moment after the exact peak of the full moon. The belief in the underlying magical principle remained unshaken. The fault lay with the human element. This mindset created a self-sustaining loop of pursuit, where the goal always remained tantalizingly out of reach, not because it was impossible, but because the seeker was not yet perfect enough to achieve it. This same pattern can be seen in the modern community that continues to chase the ghost of the Philadelphia experiment. When a scaled-down replication fails to make a test object vanish, believers do not abandon the core idea. They often point to a lack of resources, suggesting that only a nation-state could muster the electrical power required. They might argue that the precise frequency or resonance was not achieved, or that a key component of Tesla's original design, a piece of knowledge now lost, was missing from the modern attempt. The underlying belief in the event's possibility is insulated from direct disproof, much like the faith of the medieval alchemist. Both the physicist with his coils and the magician with his circle are ultimately driven by the same powerful engine, the unwavering conviction that the laws of reality are not fixed, but are instead a set of rules that can be mastered, rewritten, and ultimately transcended by those with the courage and the knowledge to try. Whether the events aboard the Eldridge unfolded as described or not, the story forces us to confront a deeply unsettling ethical dilemma that has haunted scientific and magical pursuits for centuries. What moral price are we willing to pay for a leap in knowledge? The very premise of the experiment, the alleged use of military personnel as unwitting test subjects in a radically dangerous physics trial, strikes at the heart of modern ethical standards. These sailors serving their country would have had no concept of the risks involved, no opportunity to provide informed consent, and no way to comprehend the forces they were about to be subjected to. Their reported fates, physical fusion with their ship, mental disintegration, and a lifetime of psychological torment represent the ultimate human cost of scientific ambition untethered from moral restraint. This scenario paints a picture of a command structure so fixated on a potential strategic advantage that it viewed its own crew as expendable components in a vast machine, their humanity secondary to the breakthrough they might help achieve. This cold calculus of sacrificing the few for the perceived benefit of the many is not a novel product of 20th century warfare. It is a dark thread running through the entire history of humanity's quest for power. In the medieval world, this ethical conflict was fiercely debated within the secretive circles of alchemists and magicians. The pursuit of the philosopher's stone or the power of invisibility was not seen as a neutral scientific endeavor. It was a spiritual journey with profound moral consequences. Many alchemical texts are filled with stern warnings against using the art for base gain or personal glory. They preached that the operator's soul had to be purified and their intentions aligned with a divine purpose. Otherwise, the forces unleashed would inevitably corrupt the work and destroy the practitioner. This was an internal ethical code, a recognition that power without wisdom was a path to damnation. A much darker parallel exists in the medieval practice of necromancy, the summoning of and bargaining with spirits or the dead for knowledge and power. This was the ultimate forbidden art, and its ethical implications were terrifyingly clear. Necromantic rituals described in grimoires often required appalling components, from substances obtained from desecrated graves to rituals that involved profound acts of blasphemy. The practitioner was engaging in a transaction with malevolent entities, and the cost was believed to be their own soul or the souls of others. The debate wasn't merely academic, it was a matter of eternal salvation or perdition. The necromancer, in his quest for hidden knowledge, was making a conscious choice to cross a horrific ethical boundary, believing that the secrets of the universe were worth the price of his own humanity and the potential suffering he might unleash upon the world. This medieval framework holds up a disturbing mirror to the alleged actions of the Philadelphia experiment's overseers. Where the necromancer sought power through a pact with demons, the military scientists in this narrative sought power through a potentially world-altering physics experiment. Both operated under a veil of extreme secrecy, and both were willing to risk catastrophic spiritual or physical consequences for a desired outcome. The necromancer risked his soul and the wrath of God. The project managers risked the lives and sanity of their crew and the stability of reality itself. The core ethical question is identical. Does the pursuit of a monumental goal, whether it's commanding spirits or commanding the fabric of space-time, justify the potential for irreversible, damnable harm? In our modern era, we have built extensive ethical frameworks to prevent such abuses, from institutional review boards to international treaties like the Nuremberg Code, which emerged from the horrors of World War II and explicitly prohibits non-consensual human experimentation. The story of the Philadelphia experiment, true or not, serves as a powerful cultural allegory for what happens when those safeguards are ignored or deliberately cast aside in the name of national security or scientific progress. It asks us where we choose to draw the line between what we can do and what we should do. The legend endures not just as a tale of strange science, but as an everlasting warning against the arrogance of power, reminding us that the most dangerous forces we might ever unlock are not those that bend light or twist metal, but those that tempt us to compromise our own humanity for the sake of a breakthrough. And so we find ourselves at the end of this journey, staring into a reflection that spans centuries. The story of the Philadelphia experiment and its alleged outcomes is far more than a simple conspiracy theory about a vanished warship. It is the latest chapter in humanity's oldest and most enduring story. It is the tale of our relentless drive to peer behind the curtain of reality, to grasp the levers of creation itself, whether we call that pursuit alchemy or unified field theory. The green fog over the Philadelphia Naval Yard and the misty glow of a ferry ring are not so different. Both are symbols of a threshold crossed, a line in the sand between the world we know and the vast, terrifying, and magnificent unknown that lies just beyond. This enduring enigma challenges the very categories we use to understand our world. We like to believe in neat separations, science here, myth there, history on this side, legend on the other. But the persistent echoes between the medieval quest for invisibility and the 20th century pursuit of electronic camouflage blur these lines into irrelevance. They suggest that our desire to transcend our limits is a constant, flowing through time, simply adopting the language and technology of the era it inhabits. The mystic becomes a physicist, the grimoire becomes a technical manual, but the fundamental yearning remains unchanged. The outcomes described, from men fused with steel to sailors lost in time, resonate so deeply because they are not new. They are ancient warnings dressed in modern garb, cautionary tales about the price of knowledge that has always been too great for any one person or any one government to hold. As you reflect on this tangled web of fact, folklore, and fear, we want to hear your perspective. Where do you draw the line between a hidden history and a compelling myth? Do you see the repeated patterns across centuries as evidence of a truth too profound to be erased, or simply as proof of our universal human talent for storytelling? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us if you believe the roots of this mystery truly stretch back into the medieval world, or if it stands as a uniquely modern parable about the dangers of unchecked ambition. The conversation about where science ends and mystery begins is one we're all a part of, and your voice is a vital